The golden flutes of champagne stood awaiting, poised like silent sentinels, their contents reflecting the warmth of the ballroom's lights. Gleaming under the soft glow, the decorations shimmered, as if celebrating their own existence. And there, by the entrance, stood a photograph, a symbol of a time long past, a moment captured from 1973, when we were young and full of promise. There I was, adorned in lace, with a daisy crown, Richard at my side in his navy suit. We were a picture of innocence, a snapshot of certainty that only the young could possess. The world lay ahead of us, unmarked by the weight of time. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the silver silk of my dress, a dress that had taken months to find. It wasn't just about the fabric, the design, or the color. It was about the significance of this moment. 50 years of marriage, a milestone not just of years but of lessons, growth, and perseverance. This deserved a celebration, deserved recognition. And before we step into this next chapter, I invite you to take a moment and reflect on your own journey. Where are you tuning in from? What is your story? And if this resonates with you, remember to subscribe. Tomorrow, I have something deeply meaningful to share. But then, in an instant, everything changed. Richard walked through the doors of the Oak Ridge Country Club, not as I had imagined, but with his arm around the waist of another woman. A woman who was younger, who seemed to embody everything that I had once been, but had long since ceased to be, youthful, free, and unburdened by the passage of time. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the room like an unrelenting tide. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to grasp what was unfolding in front of me. This wasn't just any betrayal. This was the man I had built a life with, the father of our children, the one who had promised me forever, till death do us part. And here he was, introducing his new companion to our grandson. In that moment, as I stood there, surrounded by the gazes of our closest friends and family, something shifted within me. It wasn't heartbreak, it was a realization, a sudden, profound release of a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged. I had carried it for years, silently, almost unknowingly. A burden that had shaped my choices, my actions, my very identity. And now, with a clarity that only comes in moments of intense emotion, I understood that it wasn't just betrayal I was feeling, it was freedom. I reached into my handbag, pulled out the manila envelope I had placed there earlier. It felt heavier than I had anticipated. Inside were the divorce papers, the legal end to a chapter of my life I had once believed would last forever. And as Richard approached me, still holding Pamela's hand, I extended the envelope toward him with steady fingers. "What's this, Ellie?" he asked, confusion in his voice. But his eyes didn't meet mine. I spoke clearly, the weight of my words carried across the room, filling the space between us. "Our divorce papers. Happy anniversary, Richard." I was 19 when I met Richard. At that time, the world was full of possibilities, and he appeared as someone who could lead us through them all. He was confident, ambitious, and so sure of what he wanted. And I, too, was certain. It was a whirlwind romance, scandalous in its speed, and for my parents, a great cause of concern. But I was resolute, and together we built a life that seemed perfect on the outside. By our 10th anniversary, Richard had established his own business, and I had stepped into the role of support. I was the woman behind the man, facilitating his success without question. This was my role, my place. But over time, I learned that the external accolades, the prosperity, the vacations, the social status were not enough to fill the internal void that was growing within me. I often told myself that I was lucky to have a husband whose ambition propelled us forward, lucky to live in a beautiful home, to travel, to enjoy comforts others could only dream of. But what I didn't acknowledge, what I couldn't see, were the cracks in our marriage. The late nights, the distant looks, the unspoken truths. These were things we didn't talk about, not even to our closest friends. We were masters of appearances. As the years went by, the rhythm of our life became predictable. The holidays, the family gatherings, the community events, they were all part of the clockwork that kept us moving forward. But beneath the surface, I felt a growing sense of emptiness. The children left, the house became quieter, and Richard's absence became more frequent. We operated like a well-oiled machine, publicly perfect, privately faltering. By our 50th anniversary, I had come to realize something profound. The life we had built, the life I had embraced, had been more about maintaining appearances than about nurturing truth. And now, as I stood in front of Richard, holding the envelope that would change everything, I understood that my true freedom lay not in the facade we had created, but in the honesty I was now embracing. 50 years of marriage. And yet, it was only now that I understood the depth of my own resilience. It wasn't the end of our marriage that had come for me. It was the beginning of my own awakening. 50 years. It's a milestone that is often treated with reverence, as if the sheer passage of time itself is a testament to success. Mom, you and Dad deserve to be celebrated. The words were spoken with such sincerity, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the truth that lingered in the air between us. Richard and I, once partners in every sense, barely spoke beyond the logistics of daily life. We slept in separate rooms, a decision he had made 5 years ago, citing my disruptive snoring as the reason. And so the space between us widened, and we became strangers living under the same roof. I promised my daughter, I'll talk to your father, though I already knew Richard's answer. He would never miss an opportunity to showcase the image of a perfect family, a well-polished life for the outside world. And so I became absorbed in the details. Venue selection, catering options, guest lists, each decision a small act of creation, a way to fill the emptiness that lingered in the chambers of my heart. But even in this mechanical process, I found a strange joy in crafting something that looked perfect, even if it wasn't. 2 weeks before the celebration, I found myself searching for our marriage certificate. I thought to display it proudly next to the wedding photo, a symbol of the life we'd built together. But when I opened the fireproof box where we kept important documents, I realized it was missing. It wasn't there. My heart tightened. Richard's office seemed the next logical place to search, but what I found there would change everything. At first, the search seemed fruitless. His desk drawers were filled with the usual business papers, receipts, and golf scorecards. But then something caught my eye. A small corner of his leather desk mat was raised. My curiosity led me to lift it, and beneath it, I found a key taped to the underside. It wasn't a key I recognized. Not for our house, not for the cars, not for any cabinet I knew of. It gnawed at me for days, this small mystery that had suddenly surfaced in a life that had grown predictably monotonous. When Richard mentioned an overnight business trip the following Tuesday, I knew it was my moment. I went to his office, key in hand, testing it on the locked drawers I had never been able to open. The bottom right drawer of his filing cabinet yielded to the key with a soft click, and I pulled it open. Inside were folders labeled with women's names: Diane, Stephanie, Catherine, Rebecca, and most recently, Pamela. My hands trembled as I opened the folder marked Pamela. Inside, I found restaurant receipts, hotel charges, a property deed for a lakefront cottage, purchased 6 months earlier, in both their names, and photos of them together. Pictures I hadn't seen before, of Richard smiling, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. And there, on pink stationery, a handwritten note, counting the days until I can wake up next to you every morning. Love always, Pam. It wasn't heartbreak I felt in that moment. It wasn't devastation, as I had expected. It was clarity. It was as though I had put on glasses, and suddenly, everything that had been blurry for years came into focus. The business trips, the late nights, the separate bedrooms, the calls he would take in another room. They had all been signs I had ignored, dismissed, or justified. I returned everything exactly as I had found it, locking the drawer once more. That evening, I went about dinner as usual, welcoming Richard home the next day, with nothing in my demeanor to suggest I had discovered the truth. But something had shifted. Something fundamental within me had changed. I called Vera, my old college roommate, now a divorce attorney in the neighboring county. I made the appointment under the guise of catching up with an old friend. Richard didn't question it. He hadn't questioned much of anything for a long time. I had become an object in his life, something familiar but unremarkable, like the furniture in a room. 50 years is a long time, Vera said when I explained my situation. The courts will take that into consideration. And then, after a slight pause, she added, and this property he purchased with his… She hesitated, searching for a diplomatic term. Girlfriend, I supplied. You can say it. That's what she is. Yes. Vera paused. Well, that property represents marital assets diverted to an outside party. It significantly strengthens your position. We spent 2 hours discussing the financial discovery, the division of assets, and my legal rights. When I left, Vera had already prepared a preliminary divorce filing, requiring only my signature to initiate the proceedings. Are you sure about this timing? Vera asked as we parted. You could wait until after your anniversary celebration. I considered it. 50 years of accommodating Richard's timeline versus my own needs. The truth I had been running from versus the freedom I had been denying myself. No, I finally said. If he chooses to bring her to our anniversary, that will be my answer. I wasn't being vindictive. I wasn't acting out of anger or spite. I simply needed to know if Richard had reached a point where his disregard for our marriage would extend to humiliating me in front of our family and friends on the one day meant to honor us both. Surely, even Richard would maintain the illusion of respect for this one significant event. But then, the week before the celebration, something unexpected happened. Richard became unusually attentive. He asked about the details of the party, offered his opinions on the menu. For a brief moment, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he still valued the life we had built together. Maybe he recognized the importance of the 50 years we had spent together. Then I overheard him on the phone in his study. The door was slightly ajar. Of course you're invited, sweetheart. You're part of my life now, and I want everyone to know it. The final piece fell into place. Don't worry about Ellie. She'll handle it like she always does. Trust me, it's time to stop hiding. 50 years with one person is enough for anyone. I stood motionless in the hallway, the dinner tray. I'd been bringing him growing heavy in my hands. So that was it. Our anniversary celebration would be the public unveiling of his relationship with Pamela. The final act in our marriage would be my public humiliation. I set the tray down outside his door and quietly walked away in our bedroom. My bedroom now. I opened the nightstand drawer and removed the envelope containing the divorce papers. I placed it in the silver clutch I planned to carry to the celebration the night before our anniversary. I slept surprisingly well, better than I had in months. When morning came, I dressed carefully in the silver silk dress I'd purchased for the occasion, applied my makeup with precision, and fastened my mother's pearl necklace around my throat. Looking in the mirror, I saw not the devastated wife I had expected, but a woman of strength. A woman who had built a family, contributed to her community, and maintained her dignity through decades of private disappointment. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility rather than resignation. You look nice, Richard commented when I came downstairs, the closest thing to a compliment he'd offered in recent memory. Thank you, I replied, noting he'd chosen his best suit, the one reserved for impressing important clients. Will you be driving separately to the country club? I need to be there early to check on the arrangements. Yes, I have a errand to run. First, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. I'll meet you there by 6. I nodded, knowing exactly what errand required his attention. He would be picking up Pamela, making sure her entrance at his side created the maximum impact. Jennifer arrived early to help with the final preparations. She fluttered around the ballroom, adjusting floral arrangements and fussing over place cards. Everything looks perfect, Mom. This is going to be wonderful. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her enthusiasm, yet dreading her inevitable hurt when her father arrived. Thank you for helping, sweetheart. Are you okay? She asked, suddenly studying my face. You seem different today. I smiled, surprised by how genuine it felt. I'm fine, just reflecting on 50 years. It's a lot to take in. By 6:30, most guests had arrived. The ballroom hummed with conversation and laughter. Old friends embraced me, commenting on how lovely everything looked, how remarkable 50 years of marriage was in today's world. I accepted their congratulations graciously, waiting for the moment that would change everything at 7 o'clock precisely. Richard entered with Pamela on his arm. She was younger than I'd expected, closer to our daughter's age than our own. Her dress was inappropriately formal, her makeup flawless, her smile uncertain as she surveyed the room. Richard guided her through the crowd with his hand possessively at the small of her back, nodding to acquaintances as if this were completely normal. The room didn't fall dramatically silent, as happens in movies. Instead, conversations stuttered and resumed in hushed tones. People found sudden interest in their champagne glasses or the pattern on the carpet. Our pastor's wife, seated at a nearby table, made an audible sound of disapproval. Jennifer appeared at my side, her face flushed with anger. "Mom, what is Dad doing? Who is that woman that I said calmly? Is your father's girlfriend?" "His what?" Jennifer's voice rose before she caught herself. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." I patted her hand. "Don't make a scene, dear. I have the situation under control." Richard made a slow circuit of the room, introducing Pamela to various guests whose reactions ranged from cold politeness to undisguised shock. By the time he approached our table, where Jennifer stood protectively beside me, the tension in the room was palpable. "Ellie," he said, as if we were meeting at a casual social event rather than the celebration of our 5 decades together. "You remember Pamela from the club's pro shop?" "I don't believe we've formally met," I replied, extending my hand with the poise my mother had drilled into me. "Since childhood, though, I've heard quite a bit about you recently." Pamela had the grace to blush, her hand trembling slightly as it met mine. "Mrs. Wilson, the party is beautiful. Congratulations on 50 years. The absurdity of receiving congratulations from my husband's mistress almost made me laugh. Instead, I reached for my clutch and withdrew the envelope. "Richard, since you've chosen to mark our anniversary by introducing your girlfriend to our friends and family, I thought it appropriate to give you my gift. Now rather than later." His expression shifted from confidence to weariness. "What's this, Ellie?" "Our divorce papers," I said, my voice steady and clear. "They're all drawn up. They just need your signature." Richard's face flushed dark red. "You're making a scene," he hissed. "No, Richard. You made the scene when you walked in with Pamela. I'm simply responding to the situation you created." Jennifer gasped beside me. Around us, conversations had stopped entirely as people strained to hear our exchange. 50 years deserves respect," I continued loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "If you couldn't give me that, I see no reason to continue this charade. Enjoy your new life. I'll be starting mine." I turned to our assembled guests, many of whom had been part of our lives for decades. "Thank you all for coming while this evening hasn't gone as planned. The food is excellent, and the bar is open. Please stay and enjoy yourselves." With that, I handed the envelope to Richard, nodded politely to a speechless Pamela, and walked out of the ballroom with my head held high. Jennifer hurried after me, calling my name, but I didn't stop until I reached the terrace overlooking the golf course. "Mom," Jennifer caught up her eyes, wide with shock. "What just happened? Did you really just serve Dad with divorce papers at your anniversary party?" I took a deep breath of the evening air, surprisingly free of the anxiety that had been my constant companion. I did. But why like this? Why tonight? I turned to face my daughters, seeing the confusion and hurt in her eyes. "Because for 50 years I've kept quiet. I've looked away. I've maintained appearances and made excuses. I won't spend another day living a lie. You knew about Dad and her. I suspected there were others over the years. I confirmed Pamela 2 weeks ago." I touched Jennifer's cheek gently. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Your father always made his own rules." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "What will you do now? Where will you go?" I smiled, genuine warmth spreading through me as I considered the question. That's the wonderful thing, dear. For the first time in 50 years, I get to decide that for myself. Inside the ballroom, I could see Richard gesticulating angrily, Pamela standing awkwardly beside him. Guests were gathering their things, the celebration effectively over, but I felt no regret, no embarrassment, only a profound sense of liberation and the first stirrings of curiosity about what my life could become when it truly belonged to me. That night I checked into the Oak Ridge Inn quaint hotel in the center of town. I'd arranged the room 2 days earlier, knowing I wouldn't want to return home after the party. Regardless of how events unfolded, the desk clerk recognized me. Everyone in Oak Ridge knew everyone else. To her credit, she made no comment as she handed over my key card. The room was simple, but comfortable. I sat on the edge of the bed and kicked off the silver heels I'd worn all evening. 50 years of marriage had ended in less than 5 minutes, 5 decades distilled to a manila envelope, and a walk out the jork. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from concerned friends, from Thomas, who had heard the news from his sister, from Maggie offering her guest room and a bottle of wine. I responded only to my children, assuring them I was fine, better than fine. The others could wait until morning. I unclasped my mother's pearls and set them on the nightstand. The woman who had worn them to her 50th anniversary party was gone. Tomorrow, Eleanor Wilson would begin becoming someone new. Morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as I awoke in my hotel room. For a moment, I felt disoriented. The bed too firm, the room too quiet, without Richard's distant snoring from down the hall. Then the events of the previous evening rushed back. Richard entering our anniversary celebration with Pamela on his arm. The shocked faces of our friends and family. The weight of the divorce papers in my hand as I passed them to him. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, 6 voicemails. Oak Ridge was a small town, and news traveled faster than light. By now, everyone would know what had happened at the country club. Eleanor Wilson, respectable community volunteer and dutiful wife of after 50 years, had publicly handed divorce papers to her husband at their own anniversary party. The thought made me smile. The first voicemail was from Richard, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Ellie, what the hell were you thinking? Call me immediately." The second, also, "Richard, this little stunt of yours is all over town. We need to talk." The third from Jennifer, concerned but supportive. The fourth from Thomas, who had booked a flight home after hearing the news. The fifth from Maggie, simply saying, "I'm proud of you, girl. Call me." The sixth from Richard again, now conciliatory. "Ellie, please, 50 years deserves a conversation." At least I deleted them all and ordered room service, coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs. Small pleasures, but significant. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten breakfast without considering Richard's preferences. First, the hotel phone rang as I was finishing my coffee. "Mrs. Wilson, there's a gentleman in the lobby asking for you. A Mr. Daniel Gonzalez. Please tell him I'll be down in 15 minutes. I dressed carefully in the clothes I'd packed, a simple navy dress, comfortable but polished professional. I'd called Dan Gonzalez yesterday afternoon, asking him to meet me the morning after the party. As Vera's recommended local counsel, he would handle the divorce proceedings. Now that I'd made my intentions clear in the lobby, Daniel Gonzalez stood as I approached. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted me, extending his hand. "I understand you've had quite an evening." "Please call me Eleanor," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. And yes, it was memorable. "I have a conference room reserved at the back of the hotel, shall we?" He gestured toward a hallway, and I followed, aware of curious glances from the reception staff. The conference room was small but private, with windows overlooking the town square. Daniel set his briefcase on the table and began removing folders. Vera sent over the preliminary paperwork she mentioned. You've been gathering financial information. I nodded, opening my purse and removing a flash drive statements from our joint accounts for the past 5 years, tax returns for the same period, property deeds for our home, and vacation property in Maine, photographs of the lakefront cottage Richard purchased with Pamela Taylor 6 months ago. Daniel raised an eyebrow as he accepted the drive. You've been thorough. I've had a lot of practice with financial records. I managed the books for Richard's construction company for 30 years. He began taking notes. How much do you know about your husband's current financial situation? Less than I should, I admitted. Richard became increasingly private about business matters over the past decade. He brought in an outside accountant 5 years ago and gradually removed me from financial decisions. That timing could be significant. Daniel made another note. Were there any major changes in his behavior around that time? I considered the question. That's when he moved into the guest bedroom, claiming my snoring disturbed his sleep. He also increased his business trips and joined the country club, despite having shown no previous interest in golf. Daniel looked up from his notepad. Mrs. Wilson. Eleanor, based on what Vera has shared and what you're telling me now, I suspect we may find your husband has been preparing for this separation for some time, possibly moving assets or restructuring finances in anticipation. You think he planned to leave me? The idea shouldn't have surprised me, yet somehow it did. People rarely arrive at an event like last night without considerable preparation. Mrs. Wilson, bringing his girlfriend to your anniversary celebration, suggests a man who had already emotionally and perhaps financially disengaged from the marriage. I felt a strange sense of detachment as I considered this possibility. What do you recommend a forensic accountant? Someone who can trace financial movements beyond what's visible in standard statements. With your permission, I'd like to subpoena records from Richard's business accounts, personal investments, and any offshore holdings. Offshore holdings. That sounds like something from a movie. Daniel smiled slightly. You'd be surprised how common they are for successful business owners, especially those contemplating a significant life change. As Daniel continued outlining legal strategies, my phone buzzed repeatedly in my purse. I ignored it until the meeting concluded nearly 2 hours later. We have a strong position, Daniel assured me as we prepared to leave. 50 years of marriage, your contributions to his business, his evident infidelity with documented diversion of marital assets to Ms. Taylor. The court's favor, equitable distribution in cases like yours. Outside the conference room, I finally checked my phone. 15 new messages, including 5 from Jennifer, whose final text read, "Dad's at the house looking for you, says he's not leaving until you talk to him." I thanked Daniel and promised to meet again the following week, after he'd had time to review the financial information. Then I called a taxi to take me home. If Richard wanted a confrontation, I'd give him one, but on my terms, not his. The taxi pulled up to our Colonial on Maple Street. Richard's Mercedes was in the driveway alongside Jennifer's SUV. I paid the driver and walked up the path, noting the geraniums needed watering, such ordinary concerns. Amid extraordinary circumstances, I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. Voices from the living room fell silent at the sound of my entrance. Mom, Jennifer appeared first, her expression a mixture of relief and worry. "Where have you been? We've been so worried. I was meeting with my attorney," I replied, setting my purse on the entry table with deliberate calm. "Good morning, Richard." He stood in the center of the living room, still wearing yesterday's suit pants. Though he'd changed to a casual shirt, his face was haggard, eyes bloodshot, whether from lack of sleep or excessive drinking. I couldn't tell. "You've been with a lawyer." His voice held disbelief rather than anger. "You're actually serious about this? Did the divorce papers not make that clear?" I removed my jacket and hung it in the hall closet, the familiar motions grounding me in this surreal moment. Richard ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture I'd seen countless times over the decades. "Ellie, you made your point. You embarrassed me in front of everyone we know. Can we please talk about this rationally? Now, I'd say, serving divorce papers was entirely rational given the circumstances. I turned to Jennifer. Sweetheart, would you mind giving your father and me some privacy? Jennifer hesitated, glancing between us. Are you sure? Quite sure. This is long overdue. After Jennifer reluctantly left, closing the front door behind her, I sat in my favorite armchair and gestured for Richard to take a seat. He remained standing. Where did you stay last night? He demanded. That's no longer your concern, for God's sake. Ellie, we've been married 50 years, 49 years, and 364 days technically. And apparently that milestone wasn't significant enough to keep you from bringing your girlfriend to our anniversary celebration. Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. I shouldn't have done that. No, you shouldn't have. Just as you shouldn't have purchased property with her using our marital assets. His head snapped up. How did you? The lakefront cottage. I found the deed, Richard, along with evidence of your other affairs. Diane, Stephanie, Catherine, Rebecca, have there been more, or did you only keep records of the significant ones? Richard sank onto the sofa, the bravado draining from him. You went through my private files, your private files in our shared home, containing information about how you've been betraying our marriage. Yes, I did. A long silence stretched between us, decades of unspoken truths hovering in the air. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice quieter than before. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed, the sound harsh, even to my own ears. Really, bringing your mistress to our anniversary party was an accident. The separate bedrooms, the mysterious business trips, the gradual erosion of our life together, all unintentional. You don't understand. You and we've been going through the motions for years. We haven't been happy. Not really. You weren't happy. I corrected him. You decided that your happiness required pursuing other women, rather than addressing issues in our marriage. That was your choice, Richard, not mine. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What do you want, Ellie? Money. The house. Is this about punishing me? This is about finally acknowledging the truth and choosing a different path forward. If you're asking about the divorce settlement, my lawyer will be in touch with yours. So that's it. 50 years ends just like that. I studied him. This man I'd known since I was 19, whose children I'd borne, whose successes I'd supported, whose secrets I'd kept. In many ways, he was a stranger. Now, our marriage ended long before last night. Richard, we both know that. He stood suddenly. I need to get some things if I'm not staying here. Take what you need for now. The rest can wait until we've sorted out the legal arrangements. I remained seated as he climbed the stairs to our bedroom. I heard drawers opening and closing, the familiar sounds of Richard moving through spaces we'd shared for decades. When he came back downstairs with a duffel bag, he paused in the living room doorway. Where will you go? I asked, surprising myself with the question. The club has some guest suites. I'll stay there for now. He hesitated. Pamela has her own place. How pragmatic I stood, signaling the end of our conversation. I'll have Jennifer and Thomas over for dinner tonight to explain things. I assume you'll want to talk to them separately. Ellie, he said, his voice catching for a moment. I glimpsed the young man I'd fallen in love with, uncertain, vulnerable. Then his expression hardened. My lawyer will call yours. After Richard left, I stood in the silent house, touching familiar objects, the crystal vase we'd received as a wedding gift, the family photos arranged on the mantel, the throw pillow I embroidered during Jennifer's soccer practices. These things had witnessed our life together. Now they would witness something new. I went upstairs to the bedroom Richard and I had shared for decades before his move to the guest room. The closet door stood open, sections of the hanging rod now empty where he'd taken clothes. His dresser drawers were partially pulled out, contents disturbed. The room felt different already, as if his departure had changed the very air. I opened my own closet and began methodically removing items I no longer wanted. Clothes I'd kept because Richard liked them. Shoes purchased for country club events I'd attended only for his sake. Jewelry he'd given me on anniversaries while he was seeing other women. Each item went into a donation box. Each removal felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The doorbell rang as I was filling a third box through the window. I saw Maggie's car in the driveway. My oldest friend, the one person who had gently tried to open my eyes over the years when I opened the door. Maggie didn't wait for a greeting. She simply pulled me into a fierce hug. "I'm so damn proud of you," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "About time. You stood up to that bastard." I laughed through sudden tears. "You always did hate him." "I didn't hate him. I hated what he did to you." She released me and looked around. "Is he gone for now? Legal proceedings will take time." Maggie followed me into the kitchen where I put on the kettle for tea. Another habit from decades of marriage, offering refreshment to guests. "I've been calling you since last night," she said, taking a seat at the counter. "Where were you?" "The Oak Ridge Inn." I needed neutral territory to think. I set out cups and tea bags. Motions, so familiar, they required no thought. "And what are you thinking?" I leaned against the counter, considering the question that I've spent 50 years defining myself through Richard's life, his business, his social standing, his preferences. "I'm not sure I know who Eleanor Wilson is." Without those reference points, then it's about time you found out. Maggie accepted the tea I handed her. "What did Dick say when you came home? Was he appropriately groveling?" He seemed genuinely shocked that I was serious about the divorce, as if humiliating me at our anniversary celebration should have been an acceptable event in our marriage. Maggie shook her head. "Men like Richard never expect consequences. They believe their own importance insulates them from ordinary rules. He's been having affairs for years." "Maggie," I sat beside her, cradling my tea. "I found evidence of at least 5 significant relationships. God knows how many casual ones there were. Did you suspect on some level there were signs, late nights, unexplained absences, emotional distance, but I chose not to see them clearly?" I sipped my tea, welcoming its warmth. "That's on me. Don't you dare take responsibility for his behavior," Maggie said sharply. "He made those choices, not you. I made choices too. I chose to look away, to prioritize stability over truth, to sell myself the story that maintaining our marriage was worth any personal compromise." Maggie reached over and squeezed my hand. "We all tell ourselves stories to make difficult situations bearable. The question is, what story are you going to tell yourself?" Now that question haunted me throughout the afternoon. As I continued sorting through belongings, separating the essential from the accumulated detritus of 50 years together, each item required a decision. Keep, donate, discard. That felt symbolic of larger choices ahead. Jennifer returned around 4 o'clock. Thomas arriving an hour later, having flown in from Seattle. We gathered in the kitchen as I prepared dinner. An ordinary family scene made extraordinary by circumstances. Dad staying at the country club. Jennifer reported chopping vegetables at the counter. "He looks terrible." "Good," Thomas said flatly. He'd always been more perceptive about his father's flaws than his sister. "He should feel terrible." "Your father made his choices," I said, sliding a casserole into the oven. "Now we all deal with the consequences." "But 50 years, Mom," Jennifer persisted. "Couldn't you at least try counseling or something?" Before jumping straight to divorce, I turned to face my daughter, struck by how much she resembled me at her age. Earnest, trusting, wanting to believe in happy endings. "Jennifer, your father has been having affairs throughout our marriage. The most recent one resulted in him purchasing property with his girlfriend. This isn't a momentary lapse or a fixable problem. It's a pattern of behavior spanning decades." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Affairs, as in multiple, at least 5 that I can document." Thomas let out a low whistle. "And you knew not with certainty until recently." I suspected I chose not to confront the situation for many reasons, some good, some less, so that time has passed. We ate dinner in the dining room, using the good china, without occasion. Another small liberation. The conversation gradually shifted from Richard's betrayal to practical matters, changing the locks, notifying the bank of our separation, establishing new routines. "I'll stay for a week to help." Thomas offered. "Longer if you need me." And I can come by every day, Jennifer added. Or you could stay with us if you don't want to be alone. Their concern touched me, but also underscored how they still saw me as someone needing protection, rather than as a woman reclaiming her autonomy. I appreciate that, but I'm actually looking forward to being on my own. I've never lived independently. From my parents' house to marriage at 19, this is new territory for me. After dinner, as we cleared the table, Thomas asked the question I'd been anticipating. Are you okay financially, Mom? Do you need help with lawyer fees or anything? I smiled, touched by his concern, yet amused by the assumption. I've been meeting with financial advisors for months, Thomas. And this morning I spent 2 hours with a very competent divorce attorney. I'm not walking into this unprepared. Jennifer nearly dropped the plate. She was carrying months. You've been planning this for months. I've been considering my options since I turned 70 and realized I might have another 20 years ahead of me. The question became whether I wanted to spend those years as I'd spent the previous 50. My children exchanged glances, reassessing their understanding of their mother in real time. You seemed happy, Jennifer said, bewilderment in her voice. You and Dad always seemed fine. We were fine, but fine is a poor substitute for fulfilled. I accepted that bargain for decades because it seemed the responsible choice for you two, for our standing in the community, for the life we'd built together. Now I'm making a different choice. After they left Thomas to a hotel near the GI airport, Jennifer to her husband and children waiting at home, I sat on the porch swing, watching darkness settle over Maple Street, the familiar houses with their glowing windows, the Murphy's dog barking at a passing car, Mrs. Peterson watering her roses. Despite the late hour, all elements of a life I'd known for 30 years, yet everything had changed. I had changed. Not suddenly, not because of last night's dramatic confrontation, but through a gradual awakening to possibilities beyond the narrow parameters I'd accepted for so long. My phone chimed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Wilson, this is Pamela Taylor. I'd like to speak with you if possible. I stared at the screen, surprised by the audacity, yet curious about what Richard's girlfriend might want to say. After a moment's consideration, I replied, Sunshine Cafe tomorrow at 10 a.m. Her response came quickly. Thank you, I'll be there. I put the phone away and continued swinging gently, my thoughts drifting to the strange meeting ahead. What could Pamela possibly have to say that would matter now? What did I want from such a conversation? As night deepened, I went inside and locked the door, the front door, the back door, the patio door, with a sense of securing my space in a way that felt novel and significant. This house, which had been ours for so long, was now mine, at least temporarily. Every decision, from what temperature to set the thermostat to which side of the bed to sleep on, belonged to me alone. I chose Richard's side of the bed that night, stretching diagonally across the mattress simply because I could. The sheets smelled freshly laundered. I'd changed them that afternoon, removing any lingering trace of our shared sleep. The bedside lamp remained on as I read until midnight. Another small freedom sleep came easily, without the usual negotiation of Richard's preferences, the right level of darkness, the acceptable amount of noise, the proper position of windows. In the gentle quiet, I dreamed of open spaces of doors, unlocking of pathways extending into sunny distances. Morning arrived with sharp clarity, sunlight streaming through curtains I'd opened fully the night before. I showered and dressed with care, selecting a green blouse that Richard had always disliked, claiming the color washed me out. In the mirror, I saw not a washed-out reflection, but a woman with clear eyes and purposeful expression. The Sunshine Cafe was busy. When I arrived at 9:50, the breakfast crowd lingering over coffee. The hostess, Darlene, paused when she saw me. News of the anniversary confrontation had clearly reached her morning. Eleanor, she said, recovering her professional demeanor. Table for one. I'm meeting someone, Pamela Taylor. Darlene's eyebrows rose slightly. She's already here. Booth in the back. Pamela sat facing the door, dressed more modestly than at the anniversary party, in a simple blue sweater and jeans. She looked younger, and daylight early 50s, perhaps with a nervous energy, evident in how she rearranged the sugar packs and straightened more. I corrected, sliding into the booth opposite her. Under the circumstances, formality seems rather pointless. Darlene appeared with coffee, her curiosity poorly disguised as she lingered, filling our cups. When she finally left, Pamela spoke hesitantly. I wanted to apologize for the other night. I never should have agreed to attend your anniversary celebration. No, you shouldn't have. But the greater offense was Richard's, not yours. She nodded, staring into her coffee. He told me it would be fine, that everyone knew about us, that you had an understanding. I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped me. And understanding, is that what he called it? I'm guessing that wasn't true. Not even remotely. Pamela pushed her coffee away untouched. I've been seeing Richard for about 18 months before me. There was a woman named Rebecca. I think she was with him nearly 3 years. I know about Rebecca and Diane, Stephanie and Catherine before her. Her eyes widened. You knew all this time, not with certainty until recently, but women develop instincts after decades of marriage. I sipped my coffee, studying her over the rim. Why are you telling me this? Because I believed him when he said you had separate lives, that you stayed married only for appearances' sake. She twisted her napkin and agitated fingers. I'm not. I've never been the other woman before. My ex-husband cheated on me. I know how much it hurts. The irony was almost too much yet. Here you are. Here I am, she agreed, sadly, making choices. I never thought I'd make believing stories I wanted to believe. We sat in silence for a moment. Two women connected by the same man's deceptions, though in vastly different ways. Did you know about the lakefront cottage? I asked. Finally, Pamela nodded. Richard said it would be our place after things changed. After he left me. You mean? He said it would happen after your 50th anniversary. That was the timeline we discussed. The celebration was supposed to be a way of publicly transitioning, showing people we were together before he officially ended the marriage. I absorbed this information with strange detachment. So you expected to be welcomed by our friends and family, to be embraced as Richard's new partner, even while I was still legally his wife. It sounds ridiculous when you put it that way, she admitted, but Richard can be very persuasive when he wants something. Yes, I'm familiar with that quality. I've had 50 years of experience with it. The waitress returned to take our orders. I chose blueberry. Pancakes a favorite. I rarely indulged in because Richard considered them too sweet for breakfast. Pamela asked only for toast. He's staying at the country club, she said after the waitress left. Not with me. I thought you should know that his living arrangements are no longer my concern. He's angry and hurt. He didn't expect you to actually file for divorce. I set my cup down carefully. What exactly did he expect? That I would smile politely while he paraded his mistress in front of everyone we know. I would continue the farce of our marriage. While he established a new life with you, he thought you'd understand that it was time to move on, that after 50 years, you both deserved something different. The presumption was breathtaking, and he unilaterally decided this without any discussion with me. Discuss how convenient for him. Pamela flushed. I'm not defending him. I just wanted you to know that I never intended to hurt you, and I'm sorry that I did. Our food arrived momentarily. Pausing the conversation as I cut into my pancakes, I considered the woman across from me. Younger, certainly, but not dramatically so, not a trophy or a midlife crisis cliché. Just another person who had fallen under Richard's persuasive charm, believing whatever narrative best served his desires. May I ask you something, Pamela? She looked up from her untouched toast. Of course. Do you love him? The question seemed to startle her. I thought I did. Now I'm not sure what's real anymore. A reasonable, uncertain touch when dealing with Richard. I ate a forkful of pancakes, savoring their sweetness. He's very good at creating illusions of success, of affection, of intention. I believed in those illusions for decades. What changed? I did. I met her gaze directly. I realized I didn't want to spend whatever years I have left living in the shadow of someone else's choices. Richard was making his. It was time I made mine. Pamela pushed her plate away. I should go. Thank you for meeting with me and for listening. Why did you want to see me? Really? Surely not just to apologize. She gathered her purse, avoiding my eyes. I needed to know if you were really going through with the divorce. If Richard would be free to. But that doesn't matter. Now I can see things aren't what I thought they were. As she stood, I felt an unexpected surge of compassion. Pamela, whatever promises Richard made to you, whatever future he described, understand that his primary commitment has always been to himself. That won't change just because I'm no longer in the picture. She nodded, her expression a complex mixture of resignation and relief. I'm beginning to see that. Goodbye, Eleanor. I watched her leave. This woman who had inadvertently catalyzed the end of my 50-year marriage in another life. We might have been friends, both drawn to the same charismatic man, both eventually disillusioned by the gap between promise and reality. The remainder of my breakfast passed in peaceful solitude. Several acquaintances stopped by my table, their greetings, a mixture of curiosity and support. I accepted both with equanimity, no longer feeling the need to manage others' perceptions or protect Richard's reputation. When I returned home, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if Richard's departure had altered its very atmosphere. I moved through the rooms with new awareness, noting places where my preferences had been subordinated to his over the years. The formal living room we rarely used, but maintained for his business gatherings. The dark wood furniture I'd never liked, but that projected the right image. The neutral color scheme that Richard insisted was tasteful, though I'd always longed for more vibrant hues in the study. I sat at Richard's desk, my desk now, and opened my laptop. The divorce proceedings would take time, negotiations about assets and property extending for months, but other changes could begin immediately. I created a document titled Eleanor's Next Chapter and began listing possibilities: repainting the bedroom in sea glass blue, converting the formal dining room into a reading nook with comfortable chairs, taking art classes at the community college, traveling to places Richard had always dismissed as too touristy or not our kind of destination. Each item I added felt like a declaration, a reclaiming of choices long surrendered. By the time I finished, the list contained 1,007 entries, ranging from the practical established separate bank accounts, to the whimsical learn to salsa dance, to the profound discover who Eleanor is when she's not defined by others. The doorbell rang just as I was saving the document through the window. I saw Daniel Gonzalez standing on the porch, briefcase in hand. Our scheduled meeting wasn't until the following week, which meant he had news that couldn't wait. I opened the door, noting the serious set of his expression. Daniel, this is unexpected. I apologize for coming without calling first, but I've discovered something in your financial records that you need to see immediately. He glanced past me into the house. Are you alone? Yes, Richard moved out yesterday. Good. What I've found suggests this divorce may be considerably more complicated than we initially thought. I led him to the kitchen where he spread documents across the table, bank statements, property records, corporate filings. As he explained what he'd discovered in just 24 hours of investigation, my pulse quickened with a mixture of anger and vindication. Richard had indeed been preparing for separation, but not in the way either of us had anticipated. The financial maneuvering went far beyond the lakefront cottage purchased with Pamela. There were obscured transactions, questionable business expenses, and most significantly, a substantial sum transferred to offshore accounts over the past 5 years, precisely the period when Richard had removed me from the company's financial operations. Based on these preliminary findings, I've filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all marital assets pending full forensic accounting. Daniel explained, we need to act quickly before more funds are moved beyond reach. He's been hiding money. The realization shouldn't have shocked me after discovering his multiple affairs, yet somehow this financial betrayal felt like another level of deception. Substantial amounts. In doing so quite systematically, Daniel indicated a series of transfers. These movements suggest long-term planning, not a recent decision. So while I was organizing our 50th anniversary celebration, your husband was actively concealing marital assets in anticipation of eventually leaving the marriage. The timing of these transactions, combined with the purchase of property with Ms. Taylor, creates a compelling pattern of evidence. I stared at the documents, the numbers and dates, swimming before my eyes. Names of banks I'd never heard of, companies I didn't recognize, listed as transfer recipients amounts that represented decades of our shared work and sacrifice. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The court will review our emergency petition. Given the evidence, I expect the injunction will be granted quickly. Then we begin the process of tracing and recovering funds. Daniel began gathering the papers. I've also taken the liberty of placing a lien on the lakefront property purchased with Ms. Taylor, as it clearly represents diverted marital assets. Richard won't take this quietly. No, he won't. Daniel's expression was grim, but determined. But neither will we. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, absorbing the implications of what I'd learned. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been systematically preparing for a future that didn't include me, methodically separating our financial lives while maintaining the appearance of our marriage. The revelation should have devastated me. Instead, it hardened my resolve. The man I'd married, the father of my children, had become someone capable of calculated deception on multiple levels. Whatever lingering doubt or sentimentality I might have harbored about ending our marriage evaporated in the face of this evidence. I called Jennifer and Thomas, asking them to meet me for dinner that evening. They deserved to know the truth, difficult as it would be to hear. Then I called Maggie. It's worse than we thought, I told her, outlining Daniel's discoveries. That absolute bastard. She responded, her voice tight with anger. After everything you've done for him. After 50 years, 9 years, and 365 days, I corrected, surprised to find myself smiling. And now I know exactly how I want to spend day 366 that evening, as I prepared to tell my children about their father's financial deceptions. I felt a curious lightness, despite the difficult conversation ahead. Each revelation, painful as it was, freed me further from the illusions that had confined me for decades. Each discovery confirmed that my decision to end the marriage wasn't hasty or emotional, but the only rational response to a reality. I was finally seeing clearly the woman who had stood in the Oak Ridge Country Club 2 nights, divorce papers in hand, had taken the first step on a path whose destination remained uncertain. But uncertainty, I was beginning to understand, held its own exhilarating potential. The possibility of becoming at last fully myself. The emergency injunction came through exactly 1 week after I'd handed Richard the divorce papers at our anniversary celebration. Daniel called with the news early in the morning, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction I hadn't heard before. The judge granted everything we asked for Eleanor, all accounts frozen, transfers prohibited, and a full forensic accounting ordered. Your husband's lawyer has been notified. How long will the accounting take? I asked, watching sunlight creep across the kitchen floor. At least a month, possibly longer, depending on how complex the financial arrangements are. But this is a significant victory. It means Richard can't continue moving assets while we proceed with discovery. I thanked Daniel and hung up, processing this development a week ago. I'd been preparing for an anniversary party, going through motions I'd perfected over decades. Now I was discussing forensic accounting and emergency injunctions, terms that would have seemed foreign in my previous life. The doorbell rang just after 9 o'clock through the peephole. I saw Richard on the porch, his expression thunderous, hardly surprising, given the morning's legal developments. I opened the door, but kept the security chain in place. We need to talk, he said without preamble. I agree. Have your lawyer call Daniel Gonzalez, for God's sake. Ellie, enough with the lawyers. This is between you and me, not anymore. The court has ordered all our assets frozen, pending investigation. Any discussions about finances need to happen through legal channels. Richard's face flushed, deep red. You're overreacting. I made a few investments you didn't know about. That doesn't justify freezing everything. A few investments. I couldn't help the incredulous tone. Richard, you've been systematically moving money offshore for years. The forensic accountant already found over $2 million in hidden transfers. He fell silent, calculation visible in his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. Look, I know you're hurt about Pamela. I handled that badly. This financial investigation is excessive. We can work this out between us like we always have. The appeal to our shared history might have worked a week earlier. Now it merely underscored how thoroughly he'd betrayed that history. The time for private arrangements has passed. I'll see you in court. I closed the door before he could respond, my heart pounding, but my resolve steady. 10 minutes later, Jennifer called. Dad just left a message saying, "You've frozen all the accounts, and he can't even buy groceries." Mom, what's going on? I sighed, preparing for another difficult conversation. Your father has been hiding money. Jennifer, significant amounts. The court granted an injunction this morning while we investigate hiding money. Why would he need to do that? To prepare for leaving the marriage without sharing assets fairly. I kept my voice even, factual. The timing coincides with his relationship with Pamela. So you're punishing him for the affair by cutting off access to his own money. Don't you think that is going too far? Her immediate defense of Richard stung. Though it wasn't entirely surprising. Jennifer had always idolized her father, accepting his version of events without question. It's not his own money, Jennifer. It's marital property accumulated during 50 years together, and I'm not cutting him off. The court is requiring a complete accounting before either of us can make major withdrawals or transfers. He says you're trying to ruin him, that you've turned vindictive. I'm sure that's easier for him to believe than acknowledging his own actions. A heavy silence fell between us. Then Jennifer said quietly, "Thomas showed me the financial documents your lawyer found. I didn't want to believe it. I know, sweetheart, it's hard to reconcile with the father you've always known. Is it true he bought a house with her? With this Pamela, a lakefront cottage 6 months ago?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry, Mom. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions." After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the back porch, needing fresh air and perspective. The garden I'd tended for decades spread before me. Spring flowers pushing through soil still cool from winter. Everything growing, changing, responding to the season's shift. My phone rang again. Thomas, this time checking in before his afternoon flight back to Seattle. The court issued the injunction. I told him before he could ask, "Your father's not happy." Big surprise. Thomas had always been more clear-eyed about Richard's flaws. I just got off the phone with him. He tried to borrow money from me, if you can believe it. What did you say? That my graduate school loans are still kicking my ass, and he has more money than I'll ever see. Thomas paused. Then he started in about how you're trying to destroy everything he's built. Also predictable. I told him he did that himself when he started hiding money and buying property with his girlfriend. Thomas, loyalty warmed me. Mom, are you really okay there by yourself? I can extend my stay. I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually. Every day brings more clarity. After saying goodbye to Thomas, I spent the afternoon in the garden, hands deep in soil, mind occupied with immediate, tangible concerns. Which plants needed dividing, where to add compost, which perennials hadn't survived the winter. The physical work grounded me, a welcome counterpoint to the abstract legal battles unfolding elsewhere. As dusk fell, I noticed a car slowing in front of the house. Not Richard's Mercedes, but a sleek black sedan. I didn't recognize it. Continued down the street, then circled back, this time, parking several houses away. The driver remained inside, barely visible in the gathering darkness. I went inside and locked the doors, drawing curtains against the night. 10 minutes later, my phone rang, an unfamiliar local number. Eleanor Wilson. A man's voice, professionally cordial. "Yes. Who's calling, please?" "Jack Harmon from the Oak Ridge Gazette. I was hoping to get your comment on the court injunction filed against your husband's assets. My grip on the phone tightened. How did you hear about that? Public records, Mrs. Wilson. The filing was quite detailed, mentioning offshore accounts and diverted marital assets. Given your husband's prominence in the business community, we're preparing a story for tomorrow's edition. The news shouldn't have surprised me. Oak Ridge was small enough that court filings involving well-known residents would naturally attract attention. Still, the prospect of our private affairs becoming public fodder sent a chill through me. I have no comment. Mr. Harmon, please respect our privacy during this difficult time. Mrs. Wilson. Allegations of financial impropriety by Richard Wilson would be significant news for our readers. Many have investments or business dealings with his company. If you'd like to provide context, I said, no comment. Good night, Mr. Harmon. I ended the call, hands trembling slightly. Within minutes, my phone lit up again. Richard. This time I let it go to voicemail, already anticipating his reaction to the newspaper's interest. His message didn't disappoint. Ellie, call back immediately. The damn Gazette is running a story about the injunction. This could destroy my reputation in this town. Is that what you want, to humiliate me publicly? Call me back. I deleted the message without responding. Whatever damage the story might do to Richard's reputation would be self-inflicted, the natural consequence of his own actions. My obligation to protect him, to manage public perceptions of our marriage, had ended the moment I handed him those divorce papers. The next call came from Daniel Gonzalez. Eleanor, I wanted to alert you that the Oak Ridge Gazette has gotten wind of the injunction. They've already contacted me. I declined to comment. Good. The reporter called me as well. I explained that we cannot discuss pending legal matters. Daniel hesitated. You should be prepared for some public attention. Cases like this naturally generate interest, especially given your husband's position in the community. I understand. I just didn't expect it so soon. These things move quickly once they enter public record. Your husband's attorney has already called me, by the way. They're requesting an emergency hearing to modify the injunction on what grounds they claim it's overly broad and prevents him from conducting legitimate business. The judge has scheduled a hearing for Monday morning, 2 days away. Will I need to attend? It would be advisable. The court will want to hear directly from both parties. After hanging up with Daniel, I sat in the darkened living room, contemplating this new development. A court appearance meant facing Richard across a formal setting. Our private conflict, now a matter of public record. The thought should have been intimidating. Instead, I felt an unexpected surge of determination. Let it all come to light. Let the truth stand on its own merit. I was making a cup of herbal tea when headlights swept across the kitchen. Windows, a car pulling into the driveway through the blinds. I saw Richard's Mercedes, the engine still running. As he approached the front door, I didn't move to answer his knock, which quickly turned to pounding. Ellie, I know you're in there. We need to talk about this news story. Open the door. I remained silent, watching his shadow through the peephole. After several minutes, he returned to his car, but didn't drive away. Instead, he pulled out his phone, presumably trying to call me again. My silent house phone confirmed the assumption. For nearly an hour, Richard remained in the driveway, occasionally approaching the door for another round of knocking, then retreating to his car when I didn't respond. Finally, around 11, he drove away, tires squealing slightly, on the quiet residential street. I slept fitfully that night, waking several times to check that doors remained locked. The shadows outside were just tree branches moving in the spring breeze. Not fear of Richard specifically, awareness that I was navigating unfamiliar territory, that old assumptions about safety and security no longer applied. Morning brought gray skies and intermittent rain, matching my subdued mood as I retrieved the Sunday edition of the Oak Ridge Gazette from the front step. The headline appeared below the fold. Local builder Richard Wilson faces a set freeze amid divorce proceedings. The article itself was relatively restrained, outlining the court filing without sensationalism, noting Richard's prominence in the business community and my decades of involvement with local charities. No comment from Richard or his attorney was included, suggesting they had exercised the same discretion I had when contacted, still seeing our private affairs laid out in black and white. Our marriage, its dissolution, the allegations of financial misconduct created a strange disconnect. These were the intimate details of my life, yet presented with journalistic detachment, as if happening to strangers. The phone started ringing at 9. Friends, neighbors, church acquaintances, all with thinly curiosity masked as concern. I let most calls go to voicemail, responding only to Maggie's text, asking if I needed company. Not today, I replied, preparing for court tomorrow. We'll call later around noon. While I was reviewing documents Daniel had sent for the hearing, the doorbell rang on the porch. Stood Pastor Green from First Methodist, his expression a careful blend of professional compassion and personal discomfort. Eleanor, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I thought you might appreciate a pastoral visit during this challenging time. I invited him in more out of ingrained politeness than actual desire for spiritual counsel. Pastor Green had been our family's minister for over 20 years, officiating at Jennifer's wedding and Thomas's confirmation. Richard had served on the church finance committee, donations from his construction company funding the new fellowship hall. 3 years earlier, we sat in the living room, Pastor Green declining my offer of refreshments. I've just come from visiting with Richard, he said without preamble. He's deeply troubled by recent events. I imagine he is. I replied neutrally. He feels the court proceedings are unnecessary, that you and he could resolve matters privately, as befits a couple. With your history and standing, I noted the careful phrasing, the implicit appeal to discretion. Did Richard suggest you speak to me about this? Pastor Green shifted slightly, his discomfort more evident. He mentioned that you might be more receptive to perspective from a spiritual advisor, someone who understands the sacred nature of marriage vows. I see. I folded my hands in my lap, studying this man who had guided our family through various religious milestones. Did Richard share with you that he's been systematically hiding marital assets while conducting multiple affairs throughout our marriage? The pastor's expression faltered. He acknowledged some indiscretions and some financial decisions you weren't aware of, but he emphasized his desire to make amends, to find a path forward that honors your 50 years together. Our anniversary was last week, Pastor. Richard arrived with his girlfriend on his arm and introduced her to our family and friends. Does that strike you as someone seeking amends? He had no ready answer for that. After an uncomfortable pause, he tried a different approach. The Lord teaches forgiveness. Eleanor, even in our darkest trials, I believe forgiveness is possible without enabling further harm. The court proceedings aren't about punishment. They're about ensuring fairness. After decades of deception, Pastor Green stayed another 15 minutes. His talking points clearly prepared in advance: the sanctity of marriage, the importance of reconciliation, the spiritual dangers of bitterness. I listened politely, offered non-committal responses, and showed him out with the same reflexive courtesies that had governed most of my adult interactions. As his car pulled away, I felt a curious lightness, as if I'd passed some test I hadn't known was being administered. Richard had deployed his influence, attempting to use our shared spiritual community as leverage. Yet the pressure that once might have swayed me, appeals to propriety, to shared history, to community, standing now seemed hollow, transparent in their manipulation. I spent the remainder of Sunday preparing for the court hearing, gathering bank statements, reviewing notes with Daniel by phone, selecting appropriate attire for my first appearance before a judge. The practical tasks kept anxiety at bay, each completed items strengthening my resolve. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. I dressed in a navy suit I'd worn to church functions and charity events, professional without being severe. The courthouse parking lot was busier than I'd expected for early morning. A reminder that our private drama was just one of many playing out in formal legal settings. Each day, Daniel met me at the entrance, briefcase in hand, his manner reassuringly calm. Richard and his attorney are already inside. Remember, today is strictly about the injunction. The judge will want to hear why you believe the asset freeze should continue and why Richard believes it should be modified. We passed through security and took the elevator to the third floor where family court proceedings were held. The hallway outside courtroom B was crowded with other couples and their lawyers, everyone maintaining careful distance. Conversations conducted in hushed tones. Divorce had its own peculiar etiquette, it seemed. Richard stood near the courtroom doors with a man I recognized as Gerald Freeman, one of Oak Ridge's most prominent attorneys. Richard's expression darkened when he saw me, but he made no approach. Freeman nodded professionally to Daniel, who returned the gesture with similar restraint. At precisely 9:30, a court officer opened the doors and began calling cases. Ours was third on the docket, leaving little time for the anxiety that had been building since we arrived. When Wilson versus Wilson was announced, Daniel guided me to the appropriate table, Richard and Freeman taking position at the adjacent one. Judge Martinez was a woman in her 60s, her gray hair cut in a practical bob, her manner brisk but not unkind, as she reviewed the case file before her. This is a hearing on defendant's motion to modify the emergency injunction issued last week, freezing marital assets, she stated, looking up at the attorneys. Mr. Freeman, as the moving party, you'll present first. Freeman rose, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Your Honor, the current injunction is unnecessarily broad and creates substantial hardship for my client, who requires access to business accounts to maintain operations of Wilson Construction, a company employing 30 people in this county. Judge Martinez glanced at the papers before her. The injunction specifically exempts payroll accounts, Mr. Freeman. Yes, Your Honor, but there are operational expenses beyond payroll suppliers, requiring payment equipment, maintenance, insurance premiums. The current restrictions effectively prevent my client from conducting legitimate business activities. And what would you propose instead? A modified injunction allowing Mr. Wilson access to business operational accounts while maintaining restrictions on personal assets pending the outcome of financial discovery. This would protect Mrs. Wilson's interests while allowing the company to function normally. Judge Martinez made a note, then turned to Daniel. Mr. Gonzalez, your response. Daniel stood, his posture relaxed but attentive. Your Honor, we oppose any modification to the current injunction. The forensic accountants have already identified a pattern of funds being moved from business accounts to personal offshore holdings disguised as legitimate business expenses. Loosening restrictions on operational accounts would create the opportunity for continued diversion of marital assets. Can you provide specific examples of this pattern? Yes, Your Honor. Daniel opened a folder on our table. Over the past 5 years, Wilson Construction made payments totaling $875,000 to a consulting company called Strategic Solutions. Bank records show that Strategic Solutions is a shell corporation with an address in the Cayman Islands. From there, funds were transferred to personal accounts, accessible only to Mr. Wilson. The judge turned to Richard's attorney, Mr. Freeman. Can you explain these transactions? Freeman conferred briefly with Richard before responding. Strategic Solutions provided legitimate consulting services for international expansion opportunities. The fact that they're based offshore doesn't make the business relationship improper. And the personal accounts Mr. Gonzalez referenced, Mr. Wilson maintains investment accounts separate from company finances as his standard practice for business owners. These accounts represent his retirement planning, not hidden marital assets. Judge Martinez removed her glasses, her expression skeptical. Retirement accounts typically have specific structures and documentation. Mr. Freeman, do you have evidence? These accounts were established as retirement vehicles rather than personal holdings. The question hung in the air as Freeman again consulted with Richard, their whispered conversation just audible from where I sat. Finally, Freeman addressed the court again. Your Honor, my client is prepared to provide complete documentation of all accounts, both business and personal, but the current injunction prevents him from even purchasing groceries or paying his temporary housing costs. We're simply asking for reasonable modifications to allow daily living and business operations while discovery proceeds. Judge Martinez considered this, then turned to me directly. Mrs. Wilson, how long were you married before filing for divorce? The direct address caught me by surprise. 50 years this month, Your Honor. And were you involved in your husband's business during that time? Yes. I managed the company books for over 30 years until about 5 years ago, when my husband hired outside accountants and removed me from financial operations. 5 years ago, the judge made another note, coinciding with the beginning of these offshore transfers. According to the forensic accountant's preliminary report, she turned back to Freeman. Mr. Freeman, I'm denying your motion to modify the injunction. The pattern of financial movements raises significant concerns about potential dissipation of marital assets. However, she held up a hand as Freeman began to protest. I will authorize the release of $5,000 to your client for immediate living expenses with the expectation that all expenditures will be documented and submitted to the court. Freeman nodded, clearly disappointed, but accepting the limited concession. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Martinez gathered her papers. The full injunction will remain in place until the forensic accounting is complete, at which time we'll reassess. I'm ordering an expedited timeline. Accountant's report due within 30 days. We'll reconvene on. She consulted her calendar, June 12th, at 10 a.m. with a tap of her gavel. Our hearing was concluded. Daniel gathered his materials, leaning close to whisper, "This is exactly the outcome we wanted." The judge clearly sees the merit in our position. As we prepared to leave, Richard approached, ignoring Daniel's presence entirely. $5,000. Ellie, that's what you've reduced me to after 50 years. Are you satisfied? Now, I met his gaze, steadily aware of other court participants watching our exchange. This isn't about satisfaction, Richard. It's about accountability. You're enjoying this, he accused, voice low and bitter, watching me scramble for grocery money while you sit in our house, spending freely. The same injunction applies to me. I reminded him, I'm limited to household expenses just as you are. The difference is that I didn't hide millions in offshore accounts. Freeman placed a restraining hand on Richard's arm. Richard, this isn't the place. Let's discuss next steps outside. For a moment, I thought Richard might ignore his attorney's advice and continue the confrontation. Instead, he shook off Freeman's hand and stalked toward the courtroom. Exit. Dignity barely intact. Daniel and I followed at a distance, discussing procedural matters until we reached the courthouse steps. There I nearly collided with a woman waiting near the bottom. Pamela Taylor, her expression anxious as she scanned the departing court attendees. She spotted Richard emerging from the building and hurried toward him, ignoring Freeman's obvious displeasure at her presence. The two conferred briefly. Pamela's gestures animated Richard's responses, clipped and frustrated, as Daniel guided me toward the parking lot. I caught fragments of their exchange. They're saying the cottage might be seized. Not now, Pamela. But I put money into it too. Daniel noticed my distraction. Try not to engage with them. Eleanor, everything needs to go through proper legal channels now. In the parking lot, safely inside my car. With the door closed, I finally allowed myself to process the morning's events. I had faced Richard across a courtroom and held my ground. I had spoken my truth to a judge who listened and understood the system designed to ensure fairness. Had, at least in this preliminary hearing, worked as intended. The drive home took. We passed familiar landmarks, the library where I'd volunteered for decades, the park where Jennifer and Thomas had played his children. the church where Pastor Green had attempted his ill-fated intervention. Oak Ridge had been my home for nearly 40 years, yet today it looked different somehow. As if I were seeing it through new eyes. At home, I found an unexpected delivery on the porch, a potted orchid with a card from Maggie. First court appearance deserves flowers. Call me later. The thoughtful gesture brought tears to my eyes. A reminder that whatever Richard might claim about my isolation or bitterness, I had genuine connections independent of our marriage. Inside the house felt peaceful, the morning's tension gradually receding as I changed out of my court clothes into comfortable slacks and a sweater. I made a sandwich for lunch and ate it on the back porch, watching birds at the feeder I'd installed years ago against Richard's objections about mess and rodents. Another small rebellion that had finally found its moment. The phone rang mid-afternoon. Jennifer calling to check on the hearing outcome. The judge kept the injunction in place. I told her, your father gets a small allowance for living expenses until the accountants finish their investigation. How did Dad seem? Her concern for Richard remained evident, though tempered now by awareness of his actions. Angry, frustrated, much as you'd expect. And you, how are you holding up? I considered the question, surprising myself with the answer. Actually, there's something clarifying about the legal process. Everything reduced to facts and evidence. Decisions based on verifiable information rather than emotion or manipulation. You sound different, Mom. Stronger. Somehow I feel different. It was true in ways I was still discovering. Each day brought new awareness of how completely I'd subordinated my own perceptions to Richard's reality, how thoroughly I'd internalized his dismissals and deflections. After the call ended, I worked in the garden until dusk, finding satisfaction in simple physical tasks, pruning rose bushes, turning compost, dividing hostas that had grown too crowded in their bed. The rhythmic work allowed my mind to roam, considering possibilities for the months and years ahead. The court had scheduled our next hearing for June 12th, giving the forensic accountants time to complete their investigation. Until then, I would remain in legal limbo, not yet divorced, not truly married in any meaningful sense, operating under court-supervised financial constraints, while discoveries continued to unfold. Yet this transitional state felt appropriate somehow, a necessary passage between what had been and what might be, like the garden in early spring, showing the first signs of new growth while still bearing traces of winter's dormancy. As darkness fell, I sat on the porch steps, listening to evening sounds, distant traffic, neighbors calling children in for dinner. The particular creaking of the old maple that had shaded our yard since we moved in, sounds that had formed the backdrop of my life for decades now, revealing new dimensions in the stillness. My phone chimed with a text message from Daniel Judge, signed, "Order releasing $5,000 to Richard today. His attorney has been notified. All other assets remain frozen." I acknowledged the update, then set the phone aside, returning my attention to the gathering darkness. The legal process would continue at its measured pace, reality gradually asserting itself through documentation and testimony. Richard would resist deploying whatever influence and manipulation he could muster. Freeman would file motions, seek delays, attempt procedural maneuvers to protect his client's interests. None of it mattered. Now, the truth had begun. Its inexorable emergence, and I had found my voice after 50 years of accommodation and silence. Whatever came next, whatever Richard did, whatever the courts decided, whatever the community whispered, I would face it standing firmly in my own reality, no longer defined by someone else's narrative. The night air carried the scent of spring soil, warming, plants awakening life, renewing itself. After winter's constraint, I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with possibility. With the promise of seasons changing in their eternal cycle, the garden in the law, in my own unfolding life, growth continued unstoppable, once begun. The forensic accountants worked with methodical precision. Over the following weeks, unraveling Richard's financial maneuvers with the patience of archaeologists excavating a buried city. Each discovery unearthed another layer of deception, another carefully constructed facade, hiding the truth of our shared resources. I maintained a deliberate routine during this period, volunteering at the library on Tuesdays, attending garden club meetings on Thursdays, having coffee with Maggie every Saturday morning at Sunshine Cafe. Normal activities that anchored me. While the extraordinary process of dismantling 50 years of marriage continued in offices and courtrooms, 3 weeks after the initial hearing, Daniel called with an update. The accountants have found something significant. Eleanor, can you come to my office this afternoon? 2 hours later, I sat across from him as he spread financial documents across his desk. Bank statements, property records, corporation filings, and jurisdictions I'd never heard of. Richard created a network of shell companies. Daniel explained his finger-tracing connections on a flowchart. Funds moved from Wilson Construction to these entities for supposed consulting services, then traveled through various offshore accounts before landing here. He pointed to a highlighted box. Global Ventures Holdings, registered in the key British Virgin Islands, and Global Ventures Holdings. Is Richard, essentially? Yes, he's the primary beneficiary, though the ownership structure is deliberately obscured through nominees and trustees as standard practice for those attempting to hide assets. I studied the complicated diagram. How much money are we talking about? Based on current findings, approximately $302 million has been moved through this structure over the past 5 years. The amount was staggering, far more than I'd imagined, even after discovering the lakefront, cottage, and offshore accounts. Where did all this money come from? Wilson. Construction is successful, but not to this degree. Daniel's expression grew more serious. That's the other concerning discovery. The accountants found evidence suggesting Richard may have been overbilling municipal contracts and inflating expenses on government projects. If true, this goes beyond divorce proceedings into potential criminal territory. The implications stunned me. Richard had built his reputation on integrity, on being the local builder you could trust. The idea that he might have engaged in fraud seemed incompatible with the man I thought I'd known. Yet, after discovering his personal deceptions, why should his business practices be any different? What happens now? I asked. We continue the financial investigation. If the accountants confirm improper billing on government contracts, we may have an ethical obligation to report it, but that's a bridge we'll cross when we reach it. Daniel gathered the papers into a folder. For now, this strengthens our position regarding the asset freeze. Richard's attorney will have difficulty arguing for release of funds. Given these findings, as I drove home from Daniel's office, my mind replayed moments from our marriage when I might have seen signs of Richard's financial impropriety. The sudden increase in his company's profitability about 7 years ago, coinciding with securing several large municipal contracts. His insistence on bringing in outside accountants to replace me. The inexplicable cash he sometimes carried, explaining it away as contractor habits. When I questioned its source, I'd accepted his explanations accommodated. His increasing secrecy about business matters deferred to his financial decisions, all part of the pattern of our marriage, where his authority gradually expanded. As my autonomy contracted, the revelation of potential fraud added a new dimension to our divorce. This was no longer simply about a husband's infidelity or hidden assets. It was about fundamental character, about who Richard truly was, beneath the respected community leader persona he'd cultivated for decades at home. I found a certified letter in the mailbox, a formal communication from Gerald Freeman, Richard's attorney, proposing mediation as an alternative to continued litigation. The letter cited the mutually destructive nature of public proceedings and suggested a dignified resolution befitting 50 years of marriage. I set it aside, recognizing the strategy behind the timing. Richard must have received preliminary reports from the forensic accountants and realized the extent of what they were uncovering. Now, he wanted to move negotiations behind closed doors, away from court oversight and public records. The phone rang as I was preparing dinner. Thomas's name appeared on the caller ID. "Mom, have you heard from Dad? He left me a weird message about potential misunderstandings regarding business practices and how things might get unnecessarily complicated if the divorce proceeds in court. The accountants found evidence he may have been overbilling on government contracts." I explained, deciding complete transparency was necessary. "Your father is likely concerned about where the investigation might lead." Thomas was silent for several seconds. Jesus. So on top of everything else, he might be facing criminal charges. It's too early to know. The accountants are still gathering information. No wonder he's suddenly interested in private mediation. There was a letter from his lawyer on your kitchen counter when I visited last week. They sent another one today. I haven't responded yet. Don't, Thomas said firmly. Not until you know exactly what you're dealing with. Dad's obviously trying to shut down the investigation before everything comes to light. After we hung up, I considered my son's advice, weighing it against my own instincts. The mediation offer was tempting in some ways. A faster, less public resolution, an end to the stress of court appearances and legal maneuvering. Yet accepting it now before the full scope of Richard's financial activities was clear seemed premature at best, potentially self-defeating at worst. I called Daniel the next morning and forwarded Freeman's letter. I expected something like this. He said, after reviewing it, your husband is getting nervous as the investigation proceeds. Should we consider the mediation offer? Not until we have complete information. The forensic accountants need at least another week to finalize their report. Once we know exactly what we're dealing with, we can negotiate from a position of strength. The doorbell rang shortly after 6 that evening through the peephole. I saw Richard on the porch alone, and without the angry demeanor of his previous visit. I opened the door but remained in the threshold, making no invitation to enter Ellie. He began, his tone conciliatory. I was hoping we could talk person to person, not through lawyers, about about ending this war before we both lose everything. He gestured toward the living room. May I come in? This isn't a conversation for the front porch. I hesitated, then stepped aside, allowing him into the house that had once been our shared home. He moved tentatively, as if uncertain of his welcome and familiar space in the living room. He declined my automatic offer of refreshment, sitting instead on the edge of the by sofa, hands clasped between his knees. You've seen Freeman's letter about mediation. I have, and I'm discussing it with my attorney. Will respond formally when appropriate. Richard sighed, running a hand through his silver hair, a gesture so familiar. It triggered an unwanted wave of nostalgia. Ellie, listen to me. There are things the accountants are finding that could be misinterpreted, business practices that might look questionable without proper context. You mean the overbilling on municipal contracts, the inflated expenses on government projects? His expression tightened momentarily before he regained control. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Those accountants don't understand the construction industry, how projects are bid and managed. They're making mountains out of routine business practices. Is that what you told Thomas when you called him about potential misunderstandings? Richard's eyes narrowed. You've been comparing notes with our son. Our children are adults, Richard. They deserve to know what's happening. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window before turning back to face me. Do you have any idea what you're risking with this investigation? If these accountants file their reports suggesting impropriety on government contracts, it could trigger audits, reviews of past projects, even criminal investigations. Is that what you want to see me prosecuted? What I want is the truth. If that includes impropriety on your part, that's your responsibility, not mine. 50 years, Ellie. Doesn't that count for anything? Are you really willing to destroy everything we've built just to punish me for Pamela? The question revealed so much about his perspective, the assumption that my actions were motivated by vengeance rather than justice. that his behavior was being unfairly magnified, that our history should outweigh present reality. "This isn't about Pamela," I said quietly. "It's about decades of deception, financial and otherwise. I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice softening. "I've hurt you and I regret that. But going forward with this investigation won't heal anything. It will only cause more damage to me, to our family's reputation, to the company that supports dozens of local families. What are you proposing instead?" He moved closer, earnestness replacing the earlier tension. "Drop the forensic accounting. Agree to mediation. I'll offer a generous settlement, the house, a substantial cash payment, ongoing support. You'll be financially secure for life, and we can both move forward with dignity. And the money you've hidden offshore, I'll make it right. Ellie, you have my word." His word, the promise of a man who had systematically lied to me for decades. The assurance of someone facing potential exposure of criminal activity. The commitment of a husband who had brought his mistress to our anniversary celebration. "I need to consider your offer," I said, neither accepting nor rejecting outright. "I'll discuss it with Daniel." Richard's relief was visible. His shoulders, relaxing as he assumed my response, indicated receptiveness. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about it for both our sakes." After he left, I sat in the quiet living room, examining my own reactions to his visit. The appeal to our shared history had touched something in me, not enough to cloud my judgment, but enough to acknowledge the complexity of unwinding 50 years together. The concern for his company's employees seemed genuine, though likely secondary to his own self-preservation. Yet beneath it all ran the current of manipulation that had defined our relationship for decades. The subtle pressure to prioritize his needs, to protect his interests, to maintain appearances, regardless of private reality. I called Daniel the IA next morning and recounted Richard's visit. Classic intimidation tactics. He observed, raising the stakes, presenting himself as reasonable, while suggesting catastrophic consequences if you don't comply with his wishes. He seemed genuinely concerned about potential criminal implications as well. He should be if the accountant's findings are accurate. Daniel paused. "Eleanor, this is the moment where many clients waver. The prospect of protracted legal battles, possible criminal proceedings, community gossip. It can be overwhelming. That's exactly why Richard is pushing for mediation. Now, before the full accounting is complete, what would you advise? Stay the course. The accountant's final report is due next week. Once we have that information, we can make informed decisions about next steps, including whether mediation makes sense at that point." The week that followed brought escalating pressure from Richard's camp. Gerald Freeman filed a motion challenging the forensic accountant's methodology. Richard called Jennifer, who then called me, in tears, worried about her father facing potential prosecution. Even Pastor Green made another attempted intervention, suggesting a private resolution would better serve the community than public exposure of alleged financial irregularities. Through it all, I maintained my position, waiting for complete information before making decisions, relying on Daniel's guidance to navigate the increasingly complex legal landscape. The steady routine of daily activities grounded me amid the turbulence: gardening in the cool morning hours, volunteering at the library, having dinner with Maggie and her husband on Wednesday evening. On Monday morning, exactly 4 weeks after the initial court hearing, Daniel called. "The accountant's report is complete. We need to meet today to discuss the findings in his office." 2 hours later, I saw immediately from his expression that the discoveries were significant. He placed a thick bound report on the desk. Between us, the forensic team found conclusive evidence of financial misconduct. Eleanor, not just the offshore accounts and hidden assets we already knew about. Systematic fraud in Wilson Construction's government contracts, spanning at least 8 years. What kind of fraud? Multiple types. Inflated labor costs, billing for materials never used, duplicate invoicing on different projects, false claims about using minority subcontractors to meet contract requirements. Daniel flipped through the report, pointing to highlighted sections. The pattern is clear and deliberate. This isn't accidental or interpretive. It's intentional deception. How much money are we talking about? Based on the contracts, they were able to review approximately $704 million in fraudulent billing over 8 years, and that's a conservative estimate. The amount was staggering, far exceeding what I'd imagined even after the preliminary findings. What happens now? Daniel's expression grew more serious. We are at a crossroads, Eleanor. As officers of the court, we have an ethical obligation to report evidence of criminal activity. However, we also have a duty to represent your interests in the divorce proceedings. Are you suggesting we withhold the report? No. I'm suggesting we need to decide on a strategic approach. One option is to present the full findings to the court as part of the divorce case, which would almost certainly trigger criminal investigations. Another is to use this information in direct negotiation with Richard's team, potentially securing a more favorable settlement in exchange for discretion about certain aspects of the findings. That sounds like blackmail. I said, uncomfortable with the implication. Not blackmail leverage. Richard clearly wants to avoid criminal exposure. That gives us significant negotiating power in the divorce settlement. Daniel leaned forward. The question is, what do you want, Eleanor? Financial security, public accountability. Both are valid objectives, but they may require different approaches. I considered the question carefully, weighing my own needs against broader ethical considerations. I want what's fair. I want my share of what we built together, without either vindictiveness or undue compromise. I also can't simply ignore evidence of criminal behavior. Daniel nodded, a balanced approach. Then we file the financial report with the court as required, but we also open direct settlement negotiations with Richard's team, making it clear that while criminal referral may be inevitable, your primary interest is in fair division of marital assets rather than punishment. The strategy seemed reasonable, fulfilling legal obligations while focusing on resolution rather than retribution. I agreed to Daniel's suggestion, and he immediately called Gerald Freeman to arrange a meeting. 3 days later, I found myself sitting across from Richard at a conference table in Daniel's office, our respective attorneys flanking us like seconds in a duel. Richard looked haggard, the confident businessman replaced by someone visibly under strain. Freeman maintained professional composure, though the tension in his jaw betrayed awareness of their weakened position. Daniel opened with formalities, appreciation for everyone's attendance, hopes for productive discussion, before placing copies of the forensic report summary before each participant. As you can see, the accountant's findings are comprehensive and concerning. We've filed the full report with the court as required, though it remains sealed pending the judge's review. Freeman glanced through the summary, his expression carefully neutral. These are allegations, not established facts. Many of the practices described could be explained as standard industry procedures or record-keeping discrepancies. Perhaps Daniel acknowledged, but they warrant investigation, which the court will likely request once Judge Martinez reviews the full report next week. Our purpose today is to discuss whether we can reach agreement on the divorce settlement, despite these complicating factors. Richard spoke for the first time, his voice tightly controlled. What exactly are you proposing? Daniel looked to me, indicating this was my moment to establish parameters. I met Richard's gaze directly. A clean break. Richard, fair division of all marital assets, including those you've hidden offshore. I keep the house on Maple Street. You keep the business with whatever consequences come from its financial practices. No ongoing entanglements, no alimony in either direction. The potential criminal referrals, Freeman asked, getting to the heart of their concern. Those aren't mine to control, I replied. The evidence has been submitted to the court. What happens next is in Judge Martinez's hands. Richard leaned forward, anger briefly overtaking caution. So this is still about punishment, about watching me face criminal charges while you walk away with half of everything. No, Richard, this is about consequences. Your choices created this situation. The affairs, the hidden assets, the financial misconduct. I'm simply asking for what's fair in the divorce. The rest is between you and the legal system. Freeman placed a restraining hand on Richard's arm, much as he had in the courtroom weeks earlier. Let's focus on the divorce settlement. That's something we can potentially resolve today. The negotiation that followed was methodical and detailed, covering properties, investments, retirement accounts, personal belongings. The accumulated material of 50 years together, reduced to line items and dollar figures throughout. Richard remained tense, but engaged occasionally, consulting quietly with Freeman before agreeing to terms. By late afternoon, we had reached tentative agreement on most issues. I would keep the house on Maple Street and receive half the documented marital assets, including a portion of the offshore funds. Once they were repatriated, Richard would retain Wilson Construction and the lakefront cottage he'd purchased with Pamela, though he would pay me compensation for the marital funds used in that purchase. As Daniel and Freeman stepped out to draft preliminary settlement documents, Richard and I found ourselves momentarily alone in the conference room. The silence stretched uncomfortably until he finally spoke. "Is this what you wanted? All along, Ellie? To destroy everything I've built?" "I didn't destroy anything, Richard. Your choices did that?" He shook his head, disbelief evident in his expression. 50 years together, and this is how it ends, with you turning me over to prosecutors without a second thought. That's not accurate, and you know it. I've thought about nothing else for weeks, but I can't protect you from your own decisions, especially when they've involved defrauding taxpayers. It wasn't like that, he insisted. Construction bidding is complicated. Everyone in the industry operates in gray areas. Gray areas are one thing, systematic fraud is another. I met his gaze steadily. The Richard I thought I married would know the difference. Something flickered in his eyes, regret perhaps, or simply resignation, maybe. "You never really knew me at all." The comment was meant to wound, to suggest our entire marriage had been as illusory as his business ethics. Instead, it struck me as profoundly sad an admission that the man I devoted my life to had always been in essential ways a stranger. "Perhaps not," I acknowledged. "I'm finally getting to know myself." Daniel and Freeman returned with draft settlement documents, saving us from further painful exchanges. The remainder of the meeting focused on technical details, timing of asset transfers, documentation requirements, court filing procedures. We signed preliminary agreements with the understanding that final documents would follow once specific values were confirmed. As we prepared to leave, Freeman pulled Daniel aside for a private conversation, while Richard gathered his papers. I stood by the window, watching afternoon traffic on the street below ordinary people going about ordinary lives, while mine continued its extraordinary transformation. Richard approached his anger seemingly spent, replaced by an emotion. I couldn't quite identify something between resignation and bewilderment. "I never thought it would end like this," he said quietly. "Whatever you believe about me, I did love you, Ellie, in my way." "I know," I replied, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Richard had loved me within the limitations of his character, and understanding that love had included control, deception, and infidelity, but also moments of genuine connection, shared achievements, the raising of 2 children. The complexity of it resisted simple categorization as either authentic or false. He nodded, accepting my response without further comment, then left with Freeman, his shoulders slightly bowed under the weight of circumstances he had created, yet never anticipated. Daniel returned to my side after they departed. Freeman mentioned they're already in discussions with the district attorney's office. Richard may be negotiating a plea arrangement regarding the contract fraud. Will he go to prison? The possibility, once unimaginable now, seemed entirely plausible. Difficult to predict, first-time offenders in financial crimes often receive probation, especially with restitution. But given the amount involved and the fact that these were government contracts, some incarceration is possible. The thought of Richard, proud controlling Richard in prison attire, subject to others' authority in the most basic aspects of daily life, created a complicated mixture of emotions, not satisfaction or vindication as he might believe, but sadness for the waste of potential, for the man he might have been without the flaws that ultimately defined him. What happens next for us? I asked, focusing on practical matters too. Avoid dwelling on Richard's potential fate. We file the settlement agreement with the court. Judge Martinez will review it, along with the forensic report, at next week's hearing. Assuming she approves the terms, we move forward with finalizing the divorce. Given the circumstances and length of marriage, she'll likely expedite the process, possibly granting final decree within 30 days rather than the usual cooling-off period. Then it's over 50 years concluded with signatures in court stamps. Daniel closed his briefcase, his expression sympathetic but practical. The legal process will end. Yes, the emotional aftermath takes longer. I've seen that with many clients, especially after long marriages. I've been preparing for the aftermath since I handed Richard those divorce papers. I said, surprising myself with the certainty I felt. In some ways, I've been preparing for years without realizing it. We parted in the lobby. Daniel heading back upstairs to finalize documents, me stepping out into late afternoon sunshine. The streets of Oak Ridge looked different somehow, more expansive, full of possibilities. I hadn't previously considered the same buildings, the same routes I'd traveled for decades, yet transformed by my altered perspective. I drove home slowly, windows open to spring air, trying to process the day's events, the settlement negotiation. While tense had proceeded more efficiently than expected, Richard's recognition of his untenable position had overridden his initial anger and denial. My own clarity about desired outcomes had provided direction amid complexity. At home, I found Jennifer's car in the driveway, my daughter waiting on the porch swing, her expression anxious. I joined her, taking a moment to appreciate the familiar creaking rhythm. Before speaking, "You've talked to your father, I guessed." She nodded, eyes glistening with unheeded tears. "He says there's going to be a criminal investigation, that he might go to jail." Mom, how did everything fall apart? So completely. It didn't fall apart, sweetheart. It's been broken for a very long time. We're just finally acknowledging the reality. But jail dad's 75 years old. He could die in prison. The plea negotiations are just beginning. There's no way to know what the outcome will be. I squeezed her hand gently. Your father made choices, Jennifer. Serious choices with serious consequences. Neither of us can shield him from that reality. She wiped her eyes, visibly struggling with conflicting loyalties. He asked if he could stay with us for a while. The country club wants him to leave the guest suite given everything that's happening. What did you tell him? That I needed to talk to David first? She looked at me uncertainly. Would that bother you if Dad stayed with us? Of course not. He's your father. Whatever happens between him and me doesn't change that relationship. Jennifer's relief was visible, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. You're being remarkably calm about all this, not calm resolved. I gazed out at the familiar street, the houses where neighbors I'd known for decades went about their evening routines. At some point you realize there's no going back to what was, only forward to what might be. We sat in companionable silence as dusk gathered, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky. Jennifer eventually left to prepare dinner for her family, leaving me alone with thoughts that drifted between past and future, between what had been lost and what might yet be found later. That evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone rang. Thomas calling from Seattle. Dad called me. He said without preamble, he sounds broken. The settlement meeting was difficult, I acknowledged, and he's facing potential criminal charges for the contract fraud. He kept saying he never meant for things to end this way, that he always thought there would be time to make things right. Thomas paused. It's strange, for the first time in my life, I actually feel sorry for him. Compassion isn't a weakness, Thomas. Even for people who've hurt us. How are you holding up through all this? I considered the question, searching for an honest answer. Rather than reflexive reassurance, I'm recalibrating, adjusting to a new reality that's still taking shape. Some moments are harder than others, but overall I feel like I'm moving towards something, rather than just away from something. After we hung up, I stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the night sky above Oak Ridge. The same stars had witnessed my wedding night, 50 years earlier, my children's births, the quiet compromises and subtle surrenders that had gradually defined my marriage. They had watched as Richard's deceptions multiplied, and as my own awareness finally overcame decades of accommodation. Now they observed this moment of transition, no longer a wife, but not yet fully independent, suspended between a past I was still processing and a future. I was beginning to envision the settlement agreement represented closure of sorts. True resolution would come not from legal documents, but from internal reconciliation with my own choices, both past and present. I thought of Richard likely alone in some hotel room, contemplating criminal charges and public disgrace. After decades of community respect, the man who had confidently brought his girlfriend to our anniversary celebration now faced consequences. Far beyond the end of our marriage, there was symmetry in that outcome, though not satisfaction, at least not the vengeful kind. He believed I sought what I truly wanted, wasn't punishment for Richard, but liberation for myself, freedom from patterns established so gradually I had barely perceived them until they had nearly consumed me. The divorce, the financial revelations, even Richard's potential legal troubles. These were external manifestations of an internal journey toward reclaiming my own voice, my own agency, my own life. As I turned from the window and prepared for sleep, that journey continued one step, one day, one decision at a time, moving steadily, if uncertainly, toward the person I was still becoming, after 50 years of being defined primarily as Richard's wife. Judge Martinez finalized our divorce on a Tuesday morning in late July, exactly 3 months after I handed Richard those papers at our anniversary celebration. The hearing was brief, the courtroom nearly empty except for Daniel beside me and Gerald Freeman with Richard. No spectators, no family members, just 4 people and a judge, concluding 50 years of marriage with formal declarations and signatures. The court finds the settlement agreement fair and equitable given the circumstances. Judge Martinez stated, her tone businesslike yet not unkind. The decree of dissolution is hereby granted. Ms. Wilson, you have requested restoration of your maiden name. Yes, Your Honor. Eleanor Jean Caldwell. She made a notation on the document before her, so ordered. This matter is concluded. With the tap of her gavel, I became legally single for the first time. Since age 19, the transition happened without ceremony or visible shift in the world around me, just words on paper. Yet they represented a profound transformation. Richard approached as we prepared to leave, his expression difficult to read. Eleanor, the name felt formal on his lips. After 50 years of Ellie Richard, he hesitated, as if uncertain how to navigate this unfamiliar territory between us. Freeman says the house transfer documents are ready for signature. The offshore funds should be released next week once the banking formalities are complete. Thank you for letting me know. An awkward silence followed. 2 people who had shared a bed, raised children, built a life together, now reduced to stiff civility. The DA's office has agreed to terms. He finally said, voice lower. I'll be formally pleading next month. 2 years with possibility of early release. After 14 months, I nodded, acknowledging the information without comment. Richard's legal troubles had progressed along a parallel track to our divorce. Negotiations, disclosures, gradual acceptance of accountability after initial resistance. He would serve his sentence at a minimum security facility in the next county, close enough for Jennifer and Thomas to visit regularly. I never thought my life would end this way, he said, a trace of the old self-pity emerging. It's not ending, Richard. It's changing. There's a difference. It can considered this, then offered a slight nod. I suppose you'd know about that. It was as close to acknowledgement of my transformation as he could manage recognition that I had already begun navigating change while he was still struggling with its inevitability. Take care of yourself, I said, meaning it despite everything. You too, Asikte, Yuod Eleanor. We parted without further exchange. No embrace or handshake to mark the occasion. 50 years concluded with quiet words in a nearly empty courtroom. Neither dramatic nor particularly painful. Simply finished outside, on the courthouse steps. I paused to absorb the moment. July's sunshine warmed my face. Traffic moved along downtown streets. Pedestrians hurried past on midday errands. The world continued unchanged, while my legal status shifted completely. Would you like to celebrate? Daniel asked, as we descended to the parking area. Many clients find a small acknowledgement of the finalization helpful for closure. Thank you, but I've already made plans. I smiled, appreciating his thoughtfulness. This isn't an ending. I need to mark so much as a beginning. I want to embrace those plans. Began immediately. Lunch with Maggie at a new restaurant on the Yaba edge of town, one Richard had dismissed as trying too hard to be sophisticated when it opened last year. The food was excellent, the atmosphere lively, without being overwhelming. The experience precisely what I'd hoped for my first meal as a legally single woman. To Eleanor Caldwell, Maggie proposed raising her iced tea in a toast, emerging from her chrysalis at precisely the right moment. To new beginnings, I agreed, touching my glass to hers and to friends who stand by. During transformations, how does it feel to be officially divorced after 50 years? I considered the question carefully, lighter, as if I've set down a burden I carried for so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't actually part of me. And Richard, how was he today? Subdued. The criminal case has overshadowed the divorce in many ways. He's facing prison, public disgrace, the collapse of his company, the loss of everything. He valued everything except you. He lost you because of his own actions long before the fraud came to light. Maggie studied me with the insight of 4 decades of friendship. You don't feel guilty about that, do you? About not standing by him through the criminal proceedings. Not guilty, no. There's sadness for the waste of potential, for what might have been, if he'd made different choices. But my departure was long overdue, independent of his legal troubles. After lunch, I drove to the real estate office, where I'd arranged to meet the new owners of our My House on Maple Street. The sale had closed the previous week. Another step in my carefully considered plan for moving forward. The young couple was eager and nervous. First-time home buyers with a toddler and another child on the way. I handed them the keys with genuine goodwill, appreciating the symmetry of a family, beginning their journey in the space where mine had unfolded over decades. The roses along the back fence need regular pruning in summer, I told them as we walked through for the final inspection. And the kitchen faucet sometimes sticks if you turn it too far left. We can't thank you enough for choosing our offer, the husband said earnestly. I know you had higher bids from the developers. I sneezed, remembering their letter, explaining their hopes for raising children in a home with history and character. The house deserves a family, and you 3, soon to be 4, deserve a home that can grow with you. My new condominium awaited. Across town, a modern 2-bedroom unit in a secure building with a garden terrace and community amenities I'd never considered before. No lawn to mow, no exterior maintenance to manage, no rooms filled with memories, both sweet and painful, just clean lines, abundant, natural light, and space I could shape according to my own preferences rather than compromises established decades ago. The moving company had delivered my carefully curated belongings the day before, furniture I truly loved, rather than pieces chosen for show, artwork that sparked joy, rather than matched a predetermined aesthetic, books I actually wanted to read, rather than displayed for visitors' approval. The remainder of the household contents had been divided between Jennifer and Thomas, donated to charity. sold at a state auction, depending on sentimental and practical value. As evening approached, I drove to Lakeside Park on the town's eastern edge, a quiet spot where walking paths circled a small natural lake. The setting sun cast golden light across the water. As I found a bench facing west, a location I'd chosen deliberately for this moment of reflection 50 years ago, almost to the day. Richard and I had stood hand in hand watching sunset from this very spot, young and hopeful, believing we understood love and commitment without having truly tested either. The memory held sweetness, despite everything that followed. Two people beginning a journey neither could have fully anticipated. Now I sat alone, a woman transformed by time and experience, watching the same sun sink toward the same horizon. The water reflected gold and crimson, then deep into purple. As twilight gathered, stars appeared one by one, eternal witnesses to human drama, playing out beneath their distant light. My phone chimed with a message from Thomas, a photo of my grandson holding up a drawing he'd made captioned, "Blake says, congratulations on your fresh start, Grandma." The simple gesture brought unaffected tears, not of sadness, but of connection, of continuity. Amid change, whatever had happened between Richard and me, our children and grandchildren remained relationships that would continue evolving in their own ways. I walked slowly around the lake as darkness settled, remembering the girl I had been, acknowledging the woman I had become through decades of small surrenders and subtle compromises. That gradual diminishment had been imperceptible until it wasn't. Until Richard's appearance with Pamela at our anniversary celebration had finally made visible what had long been true. The divorce was now complete. The legal process concluded with signatures and court stamps, yet the more significant process, internal rather than external, continued unfolding, daily learning to make decisions based solely on my own preferences, discovering interests and opinions long submerged beneath Richard's more dominant personality, establishing routines that served my needs rather than accommodating someone else's expectations. Small freedoms accumulated into larger liberation. Reading in bed until midnight, with lights fully on, preparing meals based on my own tastes rather than Richard's dietary restrictions. Spending Sunday mornings at a watercolor class instead of attending church services. That had become more obligation than spiritual nourishment. Choosing a vibrant teal for my new living room walls. After decades of Richard's insistence on tasteful neutrals, as I completed the circuit around the lake and returned to my car, I felt a profound sense of rightness, not triumph or vindication, but alignment with my authentic self. After years of subtle misalignment, the court decree merely formalized what had already occurred internally. Recognition that I deserved more than I had accepted, that loyalty had limits, that self-respect sometimes required difficult choices. The drive to my new condominium took me past familiar landmarks, the library where I'd volunteered for decades, the church where Pastor Green still occasionally attempted subtle guilt induction, when our paths crossed the country club where Richard had met Pamela while I believed him, engaged in business networking. Each location held memories, yet none defined me now as they once had. My new home awaited, lights programmed to welcome me, spaces arranged according to my preferences. Alone, as I entered, the sense of possibility nearly overwhelmed me. Rooms waiting to be filled with new experiences, blank walls ready for artwork I would choose, kitchen shelves stocked with ingredients for meals I would enjoy preparing for myself and friends. I valued at 73. I was beginning again, not from scratch. I carried wisdom, earned through decades of experience, but with fresh perspective on what constituted a life well lived. The marriage that had defined me for 50 years had ended, yet I remained, discovering capacities and desires, long dormant, but never extinguished. In the quiet of my new living room, I opened the small journal Maggie had given me that morning for recording the next chapter she'd written. Inside the cover, the blank pages represented possibilities, still unfolding a story, continuing rather than concluding. I wrote a single sentence on the first page. Today I reclaimed my name, Eleanor Caldwell, and with it, myself. The words felt both declaration and promise, acknowledging the path already traveled while embracing the journey still to come, not an ending, but a beginning, not a loss, but a discovery, not diminishment, but expansion into the fullness of who I might yet become outside my window. Stars brightened against the deepening night sky, same stars that had witnessed my wedding, my children's births, my gradual surrender to someone else's definition of my life. Now, they watched as I reclaimed that definition word by word, choice by choice, day by day. Eleanor Caldwell, no longer defined by attachment to Richard Wilson, was finally home. Not to a house, or even to a condominium, but to herself. The journey had been long and often painful, but standing now on the threshold of this new chapter, I recognized the essential truth. It was never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.